Aperture Priority, show number 19, buying a new camera.
Welcome to the Aperture Priority Podcast, an Avila Studios production where it's all about photography and fun. Now open up that aperture and let some creative light in.
Hello and welcome to show number 19 of Aperture Priority. And again, I have with me today Mr. Joe Engelbrecht.
Greetings.
Yes, today we're going to open up a hornet's nest probably.
Oh, yes.
So the topic is going to be buying a new camera. And boy, there's a lot of choices.
Right. So the question came to us. If you were just today getting into the photography business or hobby, what camera should you start with?
Boy, that's a loaded question.
Exactly. So
I wanted to start off. Some data came out, I guess, in 2018. Camera sales in general were down, I think, 20% worldwide. And I guess with the smartphones and everybody using it, you could kind of see that. And I know the pixel rate's getting better and such, the software. But a true camera is still a true camera.
Right.
You know, you're getting the bigger sensor. You could do more with it. If that's if you want to be an amateur or professional where you want to take nice landscapes and so on and so on.
Oh, and we talked about the DSLR or the mirrorless cameras compared to your smartphone cameras in a previous episode, written blogs about it. And the basic premise and the fallback are two things: the lens, the glass on the front of the camera, and the size of the sensor.
Mm-hmm.
Those two physical dimensions will make the DSLR a clear winner in a lot of different cases. Mm-hmm. So if you're wanting to get into photography, there's no reason why you couldn't use your cell phone. A lot of people do, and there's a lot of credible photography being done with modern smartphones.
Mm-hmm.
It's just some limitations.
All right. Well, wildlife shooting.
Yeah, I mean, it probably is not smart to use that 22 millimeter up against a bison in Yellowstone.
Yes,
our selfies that has been known to cause death. So that might be or a grizzly bear. You probably want to shoot those with a telephoto.
A little further away. Yeah, yeah. It just be on the safe side.
Right.
So I mean, there's so many choices now. I wrote down some camera specs of what I would look for. I know you have, and you brought up a great question.
Yeah. Well, let's just say, Tony, that you know nothing about photography. So I'm gonna erase your memory, and I'm going to say, you're just now getting into the hobby or the business. Would you buy a mirrorless or would you buy a DSLR? Which camp would you reside in?
I would have to say, and I'm using a little bit of a prejudice, because where I see things going, I always do my research. I would probably look mirrorless. I would start off where I'm going to look at what I'm going to get for long term. Now, I don't want to put out that DSLRs are going to disappear. DSLRs have been around for a while, and I think they're going to be around still for a long time, because when you get to Canon and Nikon, there's so much pro glass out there,
right,
that you could find secondhand and so on and so on. So DSLR is not a bad place to start, because your investment will go on. Plus, you can adapt these lenses eventually to a mirrorless. Some may have limitations, but if I were to start off brand new, I would have to say mirrorless. The $64,000 question is which brand?
Right.
there's some interesting competition out there. Competition's good. I've been hearing a lot about these Panasonic S1 and S whatever they are, the L Alliance thing that they went in. I've heard so many great things, but I read a recent article. Nobody's buying them. So because the sales are down, globally, I think Sony has a corner on it. And I will be blunt, as I've said on many shows before, I am not a big fan of their cameras and interface. Can you get great results? Yes, you can with the Sony. I think because Nikon and Canon have been making their own glass for their own camera bodies for a long time, there is an advantage there in the color science and all that technical stuff. But if you're starting off and if you get a Sony and you never used anything else, you'd probably think, listening to me, what's he talking about? I know my way around. But when you've used something like I've used the Nikon menu system and I'm used to it, I could find things quickly. And I have used Sony quite a few times, and I've gotten flustered with it.
We have a friend that owns a Nikon DSLR high end, and he owns a high end Sony mirrorless, and he bought it for traveling cameras, and it frustrates him. In fact, he stopped using it because of the menu system.
Yes.
But if you started with that, it probably wouldn't matter that much.
Probably wouldn't matter. And it's just like if you started driving a stick shift.
Exactly.
Instead of an automatic, people would complain like, oh my God, how do you drive this thing? And you're like, no problem.
Let me show you how I drive it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have that. Now, having said that, there are some advantages where you see the histogram as you shoot, and you could do all that. Except when you're shooting in studio, there's something you have to do because it will not show the flash. And I can't remember what it is because I haven't shot my Fuji in the studio a while. But overall, there is some advantages to mirrorless. But if you're starting off, Joe, there's some great deals on DSLRs that, man, you cannot find that in mirrorless yet in prices.
And there really are some astounding deals right now.
Right.
In fact, you can get into the business for under $300. And that was the challenge. That the question was, if I only have $300 or $800, what would your choice be? Now, you'd be hard pressed to get into a decent mirrorless camera for under $300. I'm not sure that even exists right now. But you can buy a very capable DSLR that you can grow with and mature in the business and learn the system, how to take good photos with it for under $300.
And access to lenses.
Incredible selection. So
and there are good places where you can find refurbished and good used lenses.
Right.
And I mean,
when you're talking about the legacy of both Canon and Nikon and their lenses, it's staggering what's available. And getting into the business as a brand new person, you probably don't realize the value of that entirely, but it really is as you specialize. So when someone asks me what kind of camera should I buy if I'm getting started, the question I always ask, well, what kind of photography interests you? And if you have an idea what kind of photography interests you, you're ahead of the game. However, I will say this: your interests change over time.
Yes,
if I was a birder, someone that wanted to take pictures of birds in flight and close-ups of birds, and that's quite a popular type of photography, I would not choose a mirrorless camera right now because of the autofocus issues, or the phase detection, or they're not just quite as accurate as the DSLRs right now. Now, will they fix that? Yes, they will eventually. But if I were getting into the business and if I was choosing a DSLR, I would take the Nikon D3500. And they have it's $289. It has a 24 to 70 millimeter kit lens, which is fine. It shoots at a pretty respectable 5 frames per second. It's an APS-C, which is a crop sensor, 24.2 megapixels. But the thing is, it keeps everything simple. This is a learning camera. In fact, it has a built-in photography tutor. And it's really, Nikon's done a really good job of teaching you about photography within the camera. It's pretty good performance, well, for $300.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does it have the custom settings and the front command dial? No, those are higher end. But man, if you're just getting into the business and $300 is the budget, then this is one of the three that I would recommend.
Exactly. Another thing, starting, and not just because we both use Nikon, what's nice about the Nikon system, the F mount, you could grow with that even with the cropped lens, the
Right.
DX. I think they're called DX.
Right, the DX.
You could slap that DX lens on the D850.
On the FX bodies.
Yeah. And it just grays out what you're not going to get, if I'm
Exactly.
not mistaken.
So,
yeah.
Yeah,
It
when you put a crop sensor lens, a DX lens, on a FX full frame Nikon body, it reduces the sensor to the crop size.
Exactly.
Canon does not do that, by the way. If you put an EFS lens, you cannot physically mount an EFS lens, a crop sensor lens, on a full frame body.
And I was shocked when I heard that, because we have 3 people in our group that have Canon, and and one farmer who switched to Sony. When they told me that, I was kind of caught off guard. The experience that I had with Canon a couple of years ago when the 5D Mark IV came out, how can I say it? I've experienced editing those images, because a friend of mine helped me do my friend John's wedding, and he's the only one who shot Canon. And I did like the image, that came off of that. So I had to set up a thing in Lightroom where I got the Canon and the Nikon images to all kind of look alike, for the wedding.
Right.
So, because Canon, their color science is a little bit different. Their skin tones are not as warm as the Nikon.
Yeah, and that's personal taste.
That's
exactly. Canon does have a nice sub $300 camera, the Rebel T100 or the EOS 4000D, depending on which country you live in. And it's around $250, $260.
Mm-hmm.
It's an 18 megapixel crop sensor. It comes also with a 27 to 70 millimeter kit lens. It has a little bit lower frame rate of 3 frames per second, so it's not quite as fast as the Nikon. Mm-hmm. And it's the best price. It handles nicely. The back monitor is a little bit lower resolution. And then to branch off into the Fuji has a very capable the XT100 for just under $300. It's simple, basic. I like the style. It looks retro. Mm-hmm. It looks like the old film cameras. I kind of like the styling of it. It too is a crop sensor, 24.2 megapixels, the same as the Nikon 3500. And it too comes with a 24-70 millimeter, but it has the fastest frame rate of the 3, 6 frames per second. So those are my 3 choices for $300 or less. And
what I would say, if you're looking for maybe one above that, Fuji, the X-T2, you can find, this is current, what I saw, you get that for right under $800. And that's a 24 megapixel camera. Very capable. It's a great little camera. And the nice thing about Fuji, they go a little bit further back with their firmware upgrades. Mm-hmm. So that's nice. You could get one with a kit. Well, it's not a kit lens. It's a 35 f2 lens. So the 35 in crop sensor is almost the view of a 50 millimeter in a 35 millimeter full frame sensor,
right?
Like the D850.
Mm-hmm.
So that's $1,200. And if you want to get a whole kit and caboodle, like battery grip and everything, for $1,500, you get that and the battery grip with the extra thing. So you could find deals out there, and I wouldn't hesitate to look for something that's been refurbished. So you could get a little bit. Can you do everything with a Fuji with the Nikon? Yes. The only thing Fuji doesn't have a big selection of is your big glass if you're going to be doing birding.
Right.
Like the 300s and the 400s.
Or sports photography,
right.
or anything with that, really pushing it out there, right?
Or with the Nikon and I I wrote it down here, that D500, that's a great bird camera.
You know, I'm going to get back to that because I want to tell you a little story about that. So if you have a little bit more money, $800 or so, I think you might want to consider the Nikon D5600. It's running about $600 right now, and it comes with a nice 24-70, same kit lens, but it's a good starter lens. It too is 24.2. It's a crop sensor. It gives you 5 frames per second. So all those specs are identical to the 3500, but it has a lot better, more sophisticated autofocus. And it has an articulated touchscreen on the back. And of course, with that more sophisticated autofocus, you have a little bit more of a learning curve. But this is a better camera in that term, in that respect. Then if you're going to do a Canon, the Canon Rebel T7i, and it's about $700, and it has the exact same specs. It comes with an 18 to 55 millimeter lens. It has a little more robust 6 frames per second. It too is 24.2 megapixels, and it's a crop sensor. It's got a great touchscreen. It has Wi-Fi capability, so you can send your images directly to your devices through that. Great video. And then the last one, and then for under $800 is the Olympus OMD EM10 Mark III. I wish Olympus had a little easier nomenclature. This one is for small hands. It's ideal. It's a great travel. It's retro styling, which I like. It has a tilting electronic screen, and it comes with a slightly smaller crop sensor. It's a 4/3. They're the only one on the planet that uses that, I think.
Panasonic.
Panasonic, okay. And that's a little lower megapixel, 16.1, 2470, 9 frames per second. So it has the highest frame rate of any of the cameras that we've talked about so far.
And when you're traveling, you kind of have to think about, what do you want to carry? You could buy, our friend Felix has a Carl Zeiss 35 millimeter 1.4. It's bigger than my 200 millimeter f4 lens for my Nikon.
And it does weigh a little bit.
And it weighs a ton.
Yeah.
Mount that on top of D850 in front, I should say, and you have a beast.
Yeah, you do.
And if you don't mind and you have somebody you could bribe to carry this stuff for you, yeah. But for traveling, I mean, you talk about standing out. I mean, that lens is just huge. Yeah, it's a great lens. We tested it, and it's got that Carl Zeiss look, but my God, it weighs a ton.
It really does, yes.
So I would look at APS-C type of system. Now, the Micro Four Thirds, I'm going to be honest, I've never used it. I don't know anybody personally, but I know a lot of people that use them just swear by them. They love them.
Yeah.
And they probably like that small form factor. But a couple of months ago when we did the car show, we went out on a Saturday morning downtown Visalia for that car show.
Yes.
I hadn't used my Fuji X-T1 in a while, so I took that in a 23 millimeter 1.4 lens, which is like a 35 millimeter on regular full frame. And that's what I wanted, because these shots are probably not going to be something I'm going to do something with. But the camera and its size and everything, APS-C and mirrorless, it's not too bad. Even a 1.4 lens, it's still small enough. It was light until my friend Felix wanted me to haul a Hasselblad and shoot a Hasselblad with them in my backpack. But the idea was to be light because, we're hitting 95 degrees and, you don't want to be carrying a ton of stuff here in the valley. but the size, I like that because it's more, you're not lugging this big, huge monster of a camera around your neck. And when a regular 35 millimeter lens at 1.4 is that big, and Sigma does the same thing with their art lenses. There's so much glass in them. They're so big. I don't see them as travel unless you're traveling somewhere and you want to get that one shot and you bought that lens for that purpose and you're wanting to get this ginormous print done. Okay, then.
There you go. Exactly. And that brings us up to another point. And if you have more money than $800, there's, the sky's the limit. You can, money's no object then. And you have the ability to, for the learning curve, because if you start buying these more sophisticated cameras, you're going to want to maximize the money, or maximize what you can do with those cameras. You're going to have a steeper learning curve. You're going to have to get into Photoshop. There you have another learning curve. And before you know it, your hobby has consumed you, which is fine, but just a warning. So
more disk space.
Yeah, because a camera doesn't come without the place to edit these things. So you need a little more horsepower on your laptop or your desktop, and it doesn't end. It's a sickness. I'm warning you right off the front.
You'll say, "Oh, I'm not getting Photoshop," so you buy another image editor and you'll use it, and you're like, Then you go over to your friend's house; they have Photoshop, and then you're like, "Well, okay, I'm going to plunge into this Adobe thing," and it goes on and on and on. Now you're paying a monthly fee.
All right.
So yeah, it is a hobby that you can.
Right.
Yeah. Then you see your friend that has a 2 to 500 f/5.6 constant zoom, and you're like, I want that. Well, it's only 1,300, and ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. And
I hear the common thread is that you probably just need to get rid of all your friends, and then you'll be fine.
You'll be fine. Yes. Now I did find Sony. It's an older model. It's the A7 II. The thing with Sony, when you go on, they've kept so many of their cameras they keep making, which is fine, and you can get it for right under $1,000. It's a 24.3 megapixel with a 28 to 70 lens. That's not a bad kit to get everything in. And some of them, you get a case and a card for full, and that's full frame. That's not bad. But I'm going to get into something in a bit. What was confusing when I was looking these up, they just came out with that 61 megapixel.
Yes.
So now you're going to see BSI, which stands for backside illuminated. It's the sensor.
Yes.
And basically, I'm not going to read all. You're supposed to, it's more for low light performance, the way it works. So Nikon, Sony, and Fuji, you're going to see that term BSI. So it's how it captures light. It's a little bit better. So again, if you want to be the newest and best, maybe that's what you're going to want to look at.
Well, the inherent advantage of a full frame sensor, the 35 millimeter size sensor, is its low light capabilities.
Right.
Right. Don't get trapped or think that the more megapixels is better. There's some unintended, or shall we say, hidden consequences to buying higher megapixel cameras.
Yes. And one of the things I wanted to bring up when I switched to the D800, there was these shots, I was shooting indoors. I had plenty of light. And I can't remember why I didn't have my monopod on me, probably because I couldn't find it. And I opened the images, and this was what an autofocus camera. They were a little soft. And I've noticed, it's like camera shake. Because, the D800 has 36 megapixels, which is higher than what I used to shoot. I used to shoot with basically 12 and 16.
Right.
I don't remember. I think I've shot with 24 before. Mm-hmm. So the higher megapixels, you have to kind of be careful with your cameras. You want to be a little bit more, especially with these like 61, you know, you kinda,
61 megapixels.
Yeah, because that's the current bar that Sony put out there now. It used to be 47, and I believe Canon had a 50 megapixel one.
I think they still do.
Yeah,
as a matter of fact, yeah.
Yeah, so that's something to do with the resolution, and that's where something like having IBIS,
in-body image stabilization.
Yes, and currently on DSLRs,
that's the next generation.
It would have to be, because I think of all the manufacturers, I believe maybe Pentax may have it, which is a name that's kind of forgotten.
Oh, you remember in the days when you were learning
Pentax K1000.
The K1000, everyone cut their teeth and film on that bad boy. So the larger megapixels are less forgiving for camera shake. That's the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
Which I mentioned the D500, the Nikon D500 is real popular with birders and sports action. They, for a couple of reasons. It's a crop sensor. And what birders are doing is they're sticking that 200 to 500 millimeter lens or a 500 millimeter lens on that crop sensor. So they're getting 800 millimeters or 750, whatever the crop factor is. It's way up there. And
yeah, that's 750.
Yeah, 750. But you see, since it's a 20.9 megapixel sensor, you don't have it's much more forgiving on camera shake. So they're getting stunning birds in flight images. That's been the latest development. And if you were really serious about doing sports, shooting aircraft in flight, anything moving like birds or anything, that would be something I'd look at, because Canon doesn't offer that 200 to 500 millimeter lens,
right? And
you have to go to a third party. Nikon does. It's native. The 500 has a really high frame rate. It is a birder's dream right now.
Yeah, that buffer on that's very impressive. So that is an impressive camera. And again, you could have a D500, and later on, if you want to get a D850 or whatever.
Well, you'd have the best of both worlds.
So that's kind of where the Nikon, when they came out with the D850 in the DSLR world, Canon came out, and it is a good camera, the 5D Mark IV, but they haven't answered that D850 because price-wise, right now, I think there's only a $200 difference
between the Mark IV and the 850.
Yeah. And what I would tell you, not just because it has 17 or 15 more megapixels, that D850 is a beast. It's considered the best digital DSLR to date built.
A lot of people have that opinion, right?
So will Canon answer the bell on that, or are they going to be concentrating maybe more on the mirrorless? I know they're going to have to come out with a 1D Mach, whatever it is now, probably for the Olympics too.
I agree. And a lot of our friends who are Canon users are a little unsettled by the apparent lackadaisical attitude that Canon has right now. They don't seem to be as innovative. And these aren't my words. These are some of our friends and colleagues in the business. And they think that Nikon has outperformed them in the last iteration. Now, they've been leapfrogging each other for decades. This is not the end of the story.
Right. And I do kind of see that, because honestly, when I was looking up all these models and coming up with kits and everything, I only brought up one Canon, and their mirrorless one that came out got a lot of backlash too for the one card, but it didn't have in-body image stabilization, which was a little bit of a surprise.
That is a big surprise, actually, because that is one huge advantage of these high megapixel cameras, is to have the in-body image stabilization.
And I believe they came out with a new 51.2 and a 28 to 70 f2, which is just a huge
piece of glass.
And now you have these big motors you have to put them to push those elements.
Yeah.
And not having in-body image stabilization was a bit of a surprise.
Right. Well, the EOS 5D Mark IV is a 30.4 megapixel. That's a decent. These are excellent cameras. You could make a living with this camera.
Yeah.
This is an excellent camera. I'm not in the slightest bit. This is a very high-end camera, but it's around $2,100 right now, just the body, and it's a sophisticated instrument, and I would highly recommend it if that's what if you want to go in that particular direction.
Now I'm going to go out on a limb. If you had a little bit more money, not too much, but let's say you want to get something good to start. The Nikon Z6, I would go with the Z6 over the Z7. Why? Because the Z8s will probably come out. And if you just want one camera right now and 24 megapixels, I think is great. And the reason I'm saying that, because I've been doing, with Joe and John and anybody else brave enough to go out till 1 a.m. We've been doing a lot of astro photography.
Yes.
And I think 2400, because of the low noise, I think it's a great, you get these great images. Right now, there's a current Nikon, you can get it for right under $2,400. That's with the adapter, the Z, whatever it's called.
Oh, yes. The F mount adapter.
With a 24 to 70, the f4 lens.
So you're talking about the F to Z mount adapter for the Nikon mirrorless Z6.
And right at $2,300, $2,396, so right at 24. That's a great kit. Here's the thing, you could grow with it in the future. Now, again, if you're looking for a higher step where you're going to want to go, okay, I want to get a little bit more, that's not a bad kit to get, because you could adapt the GFX lenses.
Yes.
The G. That's something
the older ones
that will autofocus.
Yes, the older ones. And that is the beauty about Nikon, is you have a rich legacy, and Canon as well, of lenses. And if you really want to try to bargain hunt, you can always go on a place like eBay and you can find these bodies for less than we've been describing. And you can oftentimes get a deal.
Now, I went go big, go home. If money is no object.
Call me. No.
Yes. The GFX50R versus the Sony A7R4 that just came out, the 61 megapixels. The GFX-R is 50. It's a medium format sensor. It's $3,900 versus $35 for that Sony. And the lenses are, they're expensive. But if you get into the higher glass of no matter what system, they're going to be expensive. But the Fuji lenses are not really more expensive than the high-end G Master Sony lenses. So, for instance, the GFX 50 3.5, and you got to remember the aperture openings are not the same. So, where you could have a 1.4 lens, like a 50 millimeter one on a 35 millimeter. Well, that's equivalent to, I believe, at f2 at the same on a medium format. So you could get really great quality built lenses for, let's see, the 50 millimeters, right under $1,000. The GFX 45 millimeter, which is like something you would use at a landscape. I don't have the correction in my head. I think it's going to be like maybe a 35 millimeter,
which would be ideal for landscape.
$1,200. Then there's zoom. It's a f4 constant, 32 to 64, $1,800, which sounds alike. But if you look at the new Nikon 24 to 72.8 and the Sony 24 72.8, and go look at the Canon 28 millimeter f2. It's a f2 lens, which is great, to 70. The prices are quite high. Now, again, this is going high end.
Which begs the question of, again, if you have that kind of money to spend, is it money well spent?
Exactly.
I I will say this though, if you're ready to make that plunge and go into, and you've learned, you've cut your teeth and you've learned how to take good pictures with these entry-level cameras, then my advice is to spend your money on the lenses first.
Yeah. And that $200 to $300 range to try out, because here's something I would suggest to do. And I learned through some of my friends, because they'll buy something, they'll spend a good amount of money, and it ends up on the shelf.
Gathering dust.
They will not use it. So either rent, or if you just want to plunge, $200, $300 is not bad way to get into the hobby. Or is this going to be a profession that you want to get into? Then your gear can grow. DSLR is still going to be around for a while. Those lenses, eventually you'll be able to adapt to your mirrorless.
I was just thinking that film is making a comeback, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a growing market, because photographers coming into the business, they say, "Yeah, I don't want the modern stuff. I want the vintage stuff," because they're rediscovering film. And I was just thinking, I wonder if someday some future photographer is going to rediscover a digital SLR. Everything is going to go mirrorless, and then somebody in the future is going to go, "Hey, this D850, that was a heck of a camera."
Yeah. I mean, you never know, because you have a hipster say, "Hey, I shoot DSLRs now."
Exactly. Everyone
I'm
looks at
looking
them
through an optical viewfinder.
Exactly. What's that?
Yeah. So again, that's a good starting price point. The thing is to do your homework, get somebody that knows cameras. I would say most people that I've dealt with in camera shops, professional shops like a Sam's, they know what they're talking about. They know how to get you in. Beware of some of these places that try to get you in and maybe promise you these kits. You have to be careful.
Yeah.
Know what you're getting into. Be careful what you buy on Amazon and even B&H. Make sure, and this is something we should bring up in another show, gray market cameras. You'll save money, but if you ever have to send that in, you're going to run into an issue. And this is something we're probably going to talk about more in the future.
Right. Gray market cameras. What is a gray market, and how does that affect you? So bottom line, I want to remind you that these choices, these camera descriptions will be online with a link that you can look at and review the recommendations that we've said.
All right. And for that much money, $200-$300, you start shooting a little bit more, you can buy a second camera if you're going to start shooting professionally and still be at a price where you can grow your system in case you need a second shooter.
Right.
If you're doing a quinceañera, a small wedding, I would trust more higher end cameras, but sometimes when you start out, you have to start out with what you get.
Right. Exactly.
And to show, years ago when I got my first D70, I had switched from a Hasselblad. I wish I had held on to that Hasselblad to digital, and Nikon came out with the D70, and I plunged into it. Which I think on the Canon side they were already on the, I forget, they're not D, it was their 20D, and 30D it was about to come out, and these people, and I would compete with, at the local fair, professional. I would make a portrait. Well, my D70 that I took this portrait with of my friend won in color portrait, and it was taken the D70 was a 6 or 8 megapixel, I can't remember.
And yes,
with the 70 to 200 2.8, good glass,
right?
And I remember the guy later on, his name was Dave. He's the one that he didn't know it was mine. I mean, he's a friend of mine. He goes, "What did you use?" And I told him, and he had a hard time believing I used that simple D70.
Yeah.
It's you learn the craft.
Right. It's a 6 megapixel
Whopping 6
camera.
megapixel.
And it gets back to a cell phone will take a great picture. It's the human brain behind the camera that's the most important tool.
Yes. Yes. Great. Well, I think we filled people with lots of information.
Full of something, yep.
Joe, so where can we find you?
www.brightangelimages.com or brightangelimages@gmail.com or brightangel_images at Instagram.
Great. And me, go to the avilastudios.com website. I'm also on iTunes. I need to fix that. Apple's going to change that towards the end of the year, so I got to go do some research on that. But it's posted there. You could find the Aperture Priority Podcast page on Facebook, Tony Avila 64 on Instagram. And if I'm forgetting something, I'll remember it because I'm all over the place and I can't remember everything.
Facebook,
yes. And let's leave it off again. And I have to look because I haven't done the show in a while and my brain's full of so many things. I got school coming up, so I had to write a syllabus and blah, 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 blah. And I still haven't done my taxes for this month, so I got to do that for the state of California or I'm in trouble. So remember to open up that aperture and let some of that creative light in.
Aperture Priority is an Avila Studios production. For more information on what Avila Studios has to offer, please visit us on the World Wide Web at avilastudios.com.